Hey everybody, it's Mike. Welcome back to the shop. Got a friend who's brought over a 2009 Jeep Wrangler Rubicon. So we've got kind of a moderate job on this one. We need to re-gear the axles from the factory 410s. He's decided to go to 538s, which is a common upgrade to accommodate larger tires and lift. We're going to put an ACOS adjustable coilover suspension under the front so that it's got some adjustability. Those are made by JKUR. Synergy ball joints, Evo sleeves, and Synergy gussets on the axles. These JKs, anybody who's been around them much knows that they have a tendency to have the axles start smiling at you. When you start running 37s on up, they typically can have some issues. If you wheel hard and aggressive, even with 35s, you can have some issues. So I generally try to, when I'm doing re-gears and so forth, I generally try to encourage people to sleeve and gusset their axles. Again, this is nothing new. If you've got any 07 to current, you're familiar with these. If not, you should be. So that's what we're doing with this. I'll just go ahead and break it up into segments. We're going to be I prefer to drop the front axle right out from under the Jeep, get it on the welding bench where you can get good, nice welds all the way around without having to contend with the springs and overhead and everything. It's not that I can't do it, it's just the end result, the finished product turns out a little nicer when you take the extra couple hours to drop the axle, get it on the bench. While I've got it there, I generally just go ahead and set up the gears and everything right there on the bench. It might work out actually better because I'd like to videotape the gear swap and demonstrate that. So let's go ahead and do all that on the welding bench and then stick it back, stab it back up underneath, and then move on to the rear. The rear I actually do in the vehicle because they're just pulling your axle shafts in the carrier. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and break this up into segments. It's going to be kind of a moderate, it's not a real big job, but I'll probably say it's a moderate. So I'll probably do in 2 halves, maybe even 3. It's kind of hard to say, it's depending on how long each section takes. So I hope you enjoy it. Hope it's informative for you, and we'll move on from here. Well, it's a nice wet, damp spring morning here in northern Utah, so perfect day to be in the shop. I wanted to touch on a couple things real quick before I actually separate the axle from the Jeep. Spent about an hour and 20 minutes, hour and 30 minutes or so last night on it. Got all the axle ready to come out. Sitting on jack stand, I just got to raise the vehicle up away from it to separate them. So anyway, the gussets that, I like to test fit the gussets down onto the axle before I actually separate the vehicle from the axle, because the way the position in which the springs are oriented can come in contact with the upper gussets. I don't know if it's a variation from manufacturer to manufacturer on the gussets, or even the same manufacturer, or I find it highly impossible that it can be the axle variations, but I have found that in some instances the springs will contact the upper gussets. So just as a preliminary measure, I like to test fit them, make any notations beforehand, so in case I got to come in and grind just a little bit. Last thing you want is have your gusset sitting there in the spring and have that spring popping past your gusset as the suspension moves through its range of motion. So I like to just go ahead and trim them if I have to. On some of them I don't have to, but on a couple I have had to go in and notch and trim these. So I'll go ahead and test fit them, make some notations, so when I get it off on the welding bench, I can go ahead and trim, do anything I need to in that respect. You know, you hate to take a nice painted axle after you get it all done and everything, stick it underneath the vehicle and realize, oh heck, now I got to go in and do some grinding on it. So just a little word of caution. I like to go ahead and test fit them prior. Another thing, the sleeves, they're just saw cut off of a random a stick of tubing, so they do have rough edges. I like to go put a slight chamfer on the outside, and then I take an emery roll on a die grinder and just put a small radius on the inside to deburr that. You don't have to, it's just I like to put a little, I don't like sharp edges. So also they come coated in oil and shrink wrapped. The oil, I'm sure, is just from when they bandsaw, you know, the fluid, the cutting fluid gets all over them. And also You can't see it on video, but it gets down through the tube. So I like to just take a rag, put a little bit of brake wash on it, stuff it in, push it through with a pry bar a couple times to clean the sleeves out. Especially the outside. As you get the sleeve in, pressed into the tube while you're welding, oil is not a good conductor. So you want to make sure you have it nice and clean. Okay, I'll go ahead and cut here and go over and separate the axle from the Jeep. So everything's unbolted. I've got the shock loose, lower control arms, upper control arms. All the steering is just bungeed up out of the way. The crossover steering tie rod, I actually just removed it. The knuckles are removed. Everything's ready to pull out and stick on the welding bench. Like I said, it took me about an hour and 20, 30 minutes or so to get to this point last night. So this is the way I like to do them. You don't have to do them this way. I just found that this makes for a better end product when you're done. So I'll go ahead and raise the vehicle up now. It's just sitting on some jack stands, and we should be able to just separate the two. Clear. Lower control arms are just kind of in the back. I didn't release the tension in the back ones, so they're just yeah, raise it up a little bit more, and we'll just slide the axle out from under it. And then also, while I have the axle out from underneath it, I'll be putting the ACOS, from JKS, the adjustable coilover suspension. You have to go in and you have to cut the OEM bump stops off. So I'll show that probably before we put the axle in. So the axle's on the bench now. I want to walk through this procedure because you can potentially damage an expensive sensor here if you don't pay attention. Up on top here is the connector, or the plug for the E-locker. There's a 6mm bolt, takes an 8mm socket. Pull that up and out of there. Once you get it up and out of position, finesse that little clip out of there. So there's your plug. Set that aside. Pull the wire down through the hole. That will all come out with your carrier. Next up, you want to remove. I actually go through and I put a ping mark on each bearing carrier, or a carrier bearing cap. So 2, 2, 1, 1. That's the way you can orientate them back on. And also, there's going to be shims in here. You want to make sure when you pull these off that the shims, for the most part, stay side to side until you, because that's what you're going to be setting your new gears up with. So you want to make sure that it's fairly, consistent, or fairly close, and then you can just move shims one side or another. But I like to keep the shims on each side. I've got to grab a thinner wall socket to put on there so I don't hit my coil for the electromagnet for the E-locker. Okay, grab my snap-on thin wall on that one. Now also, you have a metal retainer here. That goes in the notch on your electromagnet. So pull that out. Sometimes you have to coax these out just a little bit. There she comes. And there's the shims for your side, your carrier, and that part's out. Stop it. Okay, now this is the part I wanted to show you. If you look in relation, there's your pinion, and here is your sensor for your e-locker. This is what tells the little light up on your dash when your locker is actually engaged or not. When that electromagnet pulls over, it'll pull on that sensor. If you try to pull the pinion out without pulling the sensor, you will damage it, and it's about a $70–80 sensor. And trust me, the Dodge dealers do stock it because it does happen quite frequently. So I like to point that out to people. So once you get the carrier out, the next step is remove that sensor. Take a 19mm wrench. It's up here on the outside, right below the upper control arm mount. It just unthreads out of the housing. Once you get this out of the way, then you can go ahead and take your pinion nut off. And it's out. Once you get this out of the way, you can go ahead and now take your pinion nut off, your drive flange, and press your pinion out. So everything's prepped. I've got probably about 18 or so, 20 holes on this half, and about 8 or so on that half. So I've chamfered the inside and outside of the sleeves. So I'm going to insert those in. I've prepped all the areas for rosette welding. And prep the outside edge here to put a nice weld on where the U-joint goes in. So there's the one, this is the long side. Come around here to do the short side. And the sleeves are in. You can see the holes filled in, so now I'll go through and I'll bounce around and randomly start plug welding it or rosette welding it. And then I'll weld around the outside here. Then once that's done, while it's cooling, I will prep for the gussets, and then all the welding should be done. Then I can start setting up the 538 ring and pinions, the new gears. Okay, I need to get this bearing out. You know, I'm not using this pinion or this bearing. I want to get this original shim out of here so I can measure the thickness and have a good idea of my starting point. So I've just got a bearing separator clamped on there. And I'll just go ahead and press that bearing off of the pinion. And I'm going to use setup bearings on the new one anyway real quick. Okay, bearings off. Got the shim. What I was after. So now I'll go ahead over and clean this up and be ready to put my setup bearings on the new pinion and be able to check my pinion depth. So I've got my bearing separator tightened around this carrier bearing, and then I've got my I think this was made by OTC. It just threads down into your bearing separator, and it's just an accessory for them. And I'm just pulling that carrier bearing off so that I can clean the carrier and press the new ones on. They're a little long-winded here, but they once you get them going, they actually don't. They actually come out pretty smooth once you break that initial tension loose on the bearing. Once you break that coefficient of friction, and then it's just a long threaded wrestle with it. They do make a tool that clamps that has like a sleeve or like a tube slit that slides over these, has a lip on the bottom and an outer sleeve that holds it, and then it has a either a threaded rod that goes down through it, or I've seen some that have a hydraulic piston. I believe they're made by Parker or maybe OTC, I can't remember, but they actually then you just have a little remote hydraulic pump and you pump them off. So an industrial application, those come in real handy. I believe Parker makes them, but this seems to work pretty well. So you can see I just pulled the carrier bearing off there. So now I'll clean things up and I'm ready to install the new one. So go over to the press and press the new one on. So I've got my setup bearings, measured my shim, and I do have memory here, I think it was 45 thousandths. Yep, 45 thousandths on my shim. So drop that on, put my setup bearing on, and then use my old nut, and I'll just usually torque it down to where maybe 6 or 8 inch-pounds of rotating torque is all. So I make sure and get it sealed in there good, and then I'll go ahead and drop the carrier in. So I just like to put just a little bit of oil in these just so they're not dry while you're trying to set up. Just get it accurate. It's more critical with your actual bearings for the preload, but I like to do it for setup as well. So go over and set this in. Okay, I'm just dragging this around. I got about 5 or 6 inch-pounds of rotating force on the dial torque wrench there. So that's good enough for setup. On new bearings, such as this is going to have, such as this has, I like to go in the 25 to 35 inch-pound range. If I was setting it up with used bearings, I'd be in the 10 to 20, trying to hit about 15 inch-pounds for rotating torque. So now that I've got that part set up, I'm going to go ahead. I've got my case spreader on. So next up, I'm going to go ahead and set the carrier in it and check my backlash and see where it's sitting, and then I'll have to make adjustments from there. If the backlash looks good, I'll go ahead and paint on some marking compound and do a a couple of rotations to get a marking, to get a good marking on it. If backlash is way off, then I'll have to determine what I need to do from there. So after about 6 attempts, see if I can zoom in, there is the drive side, and you can see how from face to valley, or from the top of the gear to the bottom, it's equally centered on the drive side. And it's harder to tell on the coast side, but it's pretty well from flank to face centered on there as well. We ended up with 7 thousandths backlash, side to side, with the side to side. So that's a good wear pattern right there. And you can see here's my notes. We started out with 45 thousandths, then we ended up going to 50, 54, ended up 56 thousandths, 133 and a half thousandths on the left carrier, and 1.1268 on the right, and we ended up with 7 thousandths backlash. So that's the ticket right there. Now we'll go ahead and pull it all apart and put the actual bearings on, clean it up, and slap this puppy together and get it ready to go in the Jeep. Okay, I just like to take a smooth file and just lightly drag it over. You're not really trying to remove any material per se. You're just trying to knock down any maybe high spots in the factory. They can drop and ding these and put little marks in them. If that's the case, then it's a raised area, so therefore when you go to torque it down, you can have a raised spot, and it only takes a few thousandths to create clearance there. So I just like to run a smooth flat file over it, make sure he's good, and then clean it off some brake wash and put it on the carrier and torque it all down. Okay, bolts go in using red Loctite. And then they'll be torqued at 100 pounds each. And you want to work in a crisscross pattern, just much like you would be putting a wheel on. Nothing really special there. The hardest part about that is just holding everything. And I usually will take it and set it in the press and put a block on the inside ring here and on the inside ring on the bottom. You don't want to touch the, you don't want to damage that outer cage for the bearing. So I'll usually just set it in the press, and that puts enough preload on it to allow you to torque it down properly. So I'll go over to the press and set it up in the press. So then I'll just work my way around, torquing the ring gear to the case. A couple of these are kind of tricky to reach, but okay, now bump it up to 100 foot-pounds and do the same thing. All right, I've seen some people actually have a fixture that goes down and grabs into these webs, but I found this works just perfectly. So, and it allows you easy, well, fairly easy access all the way around. So that's why I choose to do it this way. Worst case scenario is you torque half of them, and then you have to maybe rotate it a little bit, put some more pressure down on it, but this seems to work pretty well. Master rebuild kit with new pinion bearings and races, crush sleeve, nut, carrier, bearings and races, pinion seal. I actually choose to replace the axle seals on the front of these after I get to welding them, just because you run a chance of damaging them. So I prefer to use the actual Mopar ones. There's the Mopar number, and so I'll replace those real quick. And I also have a full set of, for this application, of setup bearings where I've just taken a couple thousandths off of the ID so that I can slip them on and off pinions rather quickly to change shims and get my all my specs set up. Then I go ahead and as I'm doing all this, I take copious notes. Here's some notes from a couple previous ones that I've done. Rear ends. Here's all my different pinion. Every time I change one out, I write down so I don't forget where I'm at, and then I usually will put my star or circle my final one. Here's another one. So I keep notes on all these, so if I ever have to come back and reference them, I have data to pull from. Plus I engrave on the side of the ring gear what my pinion shim stack is, my backlash, my pinion preload, all that kind of stuff. So I just engrave it on the side, so if I ever pull the differential cover off, or for anybody does for that matter, they have an idea of what the specs are on those. So I'm going to go ahead and put the seals in, and then put the install the races for the pinion, because I just pulled the old ones out. So I'll go ahead and put the new ones in now. This is a seal installation tool. This end goes back against the side. This other end goes up against, seats into the seal. So you put it down, put it in there, get it started, and then as you thread this, it presses against the solid side, moves this in and presses it in. Then you flip it around, do the same thing to put the other one in. So this is just how you put these inner seals in. They can be a little tricky at times. You want to make sure and get them in the proper depth around there. And then I'll usually pack a little bit of grease around the back side to hold the spring in against the rubber lip. So now I'll go ahead and put tap the races down in for the pinion, and I'm ready to start setting things up. Okay, there it is, all completed. I've got the front axle back underneath it, sitting back down on the ground. It's leveled up. I've got the ACOS adjustable coilovers set at the bare minimum, which gives it 1 inch of lift in the front. It's leveled up nicely, so it's done. I didn't show the rear ring and pinion installation just because it's not any different than the front, other than the fact that we did it in the vehicle. So wheels are all torqued on. I just have to go in and reprogram the ECM right now to accept the 538 gears and the tire sizes, or the new tire size, and it's ready to roll. So thanks for watching. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to go ahead and post them in the comment section. Thank you.